your destiny. Flawless victory.
What's going on, guys? LordKing here again, back with my usual UFC review post 212, UFC 212, Aldo vs Holloway. It was a pretty good event, actually. Overall, across the board, there were a lot of finishes, relatively few amount of decisions, and again, I just thought the card was pretty good. We saw a lot of these sort of newer upcomers kind of coming through the division. It was a great sort of showcase event to show us as to these sort of good new, as I mentioned, upcomers, and it. Obviously, if you know, the results are going to be coming up in this anyway. We have a new champion and a possible new #1 contender, or maybe it's looking very good at the moment. So let's go into the actual card itself. We had a pretty good card again, as I mentioned. We had a 15.4k attendance. Fight of the night was Holloway versus Aldo, which I'll go more in detail into mostly. And then we also had performance of the night, Claudia Gadelha, and then Kelleher, another great performance. Now, looking into the actual card itself, as you can see, obviously Jose Aldo was defeated by Max Holloway. Now, this was, a lot of people didn't actually expect this, but again, we can go into a little bit more detail in a moment. It was, again, as in my preview, I didn't make a prediction on this fight, mainly because it could have gone either way. Both fighters have incredible assets to their name, so this is almost a new era, and we can kind of go into that in just a moment. As you can also see, Claudia Gadelha beat Kowalkiewicz in incredible fashion. The performance of the night bonus was very, very justified for her. Vitor Belfort beat Nate Marquardt. A lot of people argue that this should not have been his win, but I won't necessarily say he was the most deserved of winning this fight, but again, I won't disagree with it. It's because it's very, very nice to see him winning. He also announced some great things, that he's going to have a 5-fight contract, I believe, which is pretty good to see. Borrachinha beat Bangbos, which was an incredibly entertaining fight, to be honest. Borrachinha, they had a lot of animosity building up to this fight in the weigh-ins and things like that, and Borrachinha came out incredibly aggressive, and so did Bangbos, to be honest, but Borrachinha's cardio lasted a bit longer, and it was in general a very, very good fight to actually watch. So it was a pretty interesting one. Bangbos did try some weird sort of double-handed sledgehammer technique. It was quite odd to see, but it was very good. And also, as I mentioned, Kelleher was a very, very good fight, submitting Alcantara, in which no one had expected to happen. So let's look into Aldo versus Holloway more specifically now. As you can see on your screen, we have, well, as obviously the winner is the main thing, winner via TKO. Total strikes, Holloway pretty much overwhelmed him. I think a hell of a lot of these did come from when Holloway was on the ground. He basically had Aldo in mount and landed a lot of strikes. So again, I don't think this is the biggest stat to take away from this, because I think a lot of them were when Aldo was hurt and on the ground. Significant strikes, 55 to 104. Again, I make the same sort of point. There's not really too much stats input to look at this, to be honest. The main thing is actually going through the fight itself and seeing what the fighters did right and seeing what the fighters did wrong, which I will now do. But very briefly before I go into that, stay tuned to the end of the video, because there's a very, very nice clip of Max Holloway returning to Hawaii, or you can skip to it now if you wanted to. Towards the end of the video, there is a very, very nice clip of him actually returning to Hawaii, and it's an incredibly warming scene to see. But let's go into Holloway versus Aldo now. Now, this started as an incredibly close matchup, and what a lot of people actually predicted, the ones who said Holloway would win, pretty much predicted this identically, where Aldo would come out very strong, and then what Aldo tends to do is he always tends to taper off towards the end, normally rounds 4 and 5. We saw it a bit in round 3 this time, where he tapers off and kind of relaxes a bit and isn't as fast as in the first rounds. What the fighters did right, so we'll go through Aldo first. Incredible boxing. His boxing is, him and Holloway and McGregor probably are the best in the division. Aldo is, again, he's up there in the top of the UFC. His boxing is unbelievable. The first 2 rounds, the speed he had on some of his shots were lightning quick. Holloway just didn't even see them coming. He didn't have time to react. So some of them are incredibly good. Some great counters as well. Now on to Holloway's side. Holloway, again, he showed some incredible toughness in the first 2 rounds. He was taking a few relatively good amounts of hits, to be honest. And then also, aside from the toughness, he actually played a good sort of mental game, in the sense towards the end of the second round he started egging Aldo on a little bit, putting his hands up and kind of showing himself that this is my fight and you can't really hit, whatever you're going to hit me with won't really affect me, is kind of what we saw from Holloway. And then obviously in the third round, he put on a hell of a lot of pace into his fight. Started doing some alternate stance rushing, as we see in some karate sort of maneuvers. So which is what we see from Holloway a lot of the time. If you saw my preview, you'll know that I picked up on that sort of stance changing thing. We started to see that a lot more in the third round, which is when Holloway actually started to flourish and obviously got the finish, to be honest. Now, what the fighters did wrong. Now, this was one of my incredibly annoying things. I was sitting there watching this and almost screaming at the TV that I was incredibly frustrated that Jose Aldo did not leg kick. He threw one kick. So a lot of people were saying there was an injury, or possibly he had some surgery, or maybe broke his leg beforehand a while ago, maybe a few years ago. So he's quite tentative to kick. But he threw the one leg kick relatively well, I thought. So I'm not really too sure as to why. Against when he fought Frankie Edgar, he didn't throw that many, I think because of the threat of a takedown. But against Holloway is almost as similar to the Nate Diaz. If you've seen Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz too, he has a similar sort of stance. He puts a hell of a lot of weight onto his lead leg because he's a boxer predominantly. He obviously throws his kicks and things, but he's predominantly a boxer. So boxers tend to put a lot of weight onto their lead leg. So now chopping down that lead leg with kicks is the way. It's just the way to prevent these boxers coming forward. And the fact Aldo only threw one leg kick, I believe, for 3 rounds, I was gobsmacked. I was so speechless by it. It was quite a crazy sort of thing to see. I believe in his past 4 fights, he's thrown something like 11 leg kicks in total. So I'm not sure if this is maybe an arrogance thing where he thinks he has the best boxing in the UFC, so he can box with everyone. Again, his boxing is incredible, but the leg kicks are one of his greatest assets to ever have in the UFC. Some of the best leg kicks in the UFC. So the fact he doesn't actually use them, again, I'm not too sure of the actual reasoning behind it. It's arrogance. It's obviously just a sort of me assuming something here. It could be because of an injury. He maybe kicked Holloway once and then got re-injured. It's a lot of things could have happened. Another thing is the wrestling. We didn't see any wrestling from Aldo. Again, a good asset of his, and obviously his jiu-jitsu is absolutely incredible. The only other thing that annoyed me with Aldo was when he was in mount, he was basically getting beaten the crap out of by Holloway here with these punches. I think he was hurt, so this is just an almost slight annoyance thing to me. He kept putting his thumb up as to say he's alright, but wasn't moving at all or scrambling. And then obviously Big John McCarthy sees this, has to protect the fighters, so he stopped the fight. It was a great stoppage, I thought. The fight should not have been going on longer. But then he obviously contested and complained a hell of a lot after, saying that he was okay. But obviously he wasn't moving at all, just with his thumb up. So it wasn't the right sort of thing to be doing on his behalf. Someone with his experience should know that. But again, obviously I'm assuming he seemed to be hurt. So it's maybe he was actually hurting out of the fight, but just instinct put his thumb up. So again, I'm just looking into it a little bit too much. He slowed down in the third is one of the final sort of things we have going on. He slowed down in the third, which meant that all of his things kind of got a little bit, it got a lot slower. Normally we see this happening towards the end of the third and the fourth and the fifth, but he just didn't seem to be as quick. As I mentioned, he started off incredibly quick, moving a hell of a lot. His punches were so rapid and lightning. His head movement was pretty good as well. And then the third round, when the finish actually came, it was a 1-2-1-2 from Holloway, so a jab cross from Holloway, and Aldo basically tried to slip the first 1-2, and then he did pretty much slip it. Then on the way back, instead of moving his feet, he basically returned his head to the center line, which is almost kind of a no-go without moving your feet. I suppose it can be done if you're quick enough, but he didn't move his feet or reposition at all, so he was pretty much in the exact same place as the first one too. So obviously Holloway's seen this and basically thought, okay, well, I'll just fire off another one. And he clipped him and then put him down, resulting in what we saw, which was the finish. Now, the only thing I have wrong for Holloway, what he did wrong, is probably just he took a few too many hits early on. I suppose he was adapting, but he took a few too many hits early on. He fought a great fight. Again, this is how a lot of people said that he would win, would be by weathering out the first 2 rounds, which he did, and then dominating from 3, 4, 5, maybe 4, 5, and he did that with spectacular fashion. So incredibly fair play to him. Rating of each fighter, I think I would give Aldo a 3 out of 5, simply because the first 2 rounds he did look very good. His speed again was some of the quickest I've ever seen Aldo, age 30 as well. He doesn't look like he's slowing down. He posted his Instagram post saying that he's coming back, and he's not going to be let down by this, so it's great. Holloway, I have to give a 5 out of 5. He was absolutely phenomenal. Just everything in general, the way he fought, the way he withstood Aldo's first 2 rounds with fast pace and then came back in the third, and obviously the taunting as well in the end of the second. It was a great fight to see, and again, it was it's almost the new sort of era. It was very good. So moving into the next part, again, it was an incredibly exciting fight. As we mentioned, it was the fight of the night before. There was no reffing problems. As I mentioned, Big John McCarthy, the referee for this fight, I thought it was an incredibly good stoppage. He gave Aldo a great chance to come back, and when he thought he wasn't pretty much scrambling anymore, he stopped the fight. So a good stoppage to John McCarthy. No contentious moments apart from, as I mentioned, the leg kicks were slightly annoying. I wanted to see them from Aldo, and also Aldo mentioning it was an early stoppage, but I went over that briefly, saying that he should have kept moving. What's next for each fighter? Aldo, I think he could go to lightweight, as you saw on the Instagram post. He wants to come back, so he could go to lightweight, and then which is more of his natural sort of weight. He has to cut a lot of weight to reach 145 featherweight, so going to 155 lightweight could be great. Moving camp could be an option. Claudia Gadea, his previous teammate who also won on this card and looked phenomenal, has moved camp. She is training over in Albuquerque now in a co with Luttrell and Jackson Wink MMA. So that could also be another possibility, moving camp. Holloway, the world is his oyster now. He can do almost anything he wants. One is Frankie Edgar seems to be the obvious option for his next title, his first title defense actually. But then there's also an incentive for McGregor to come back down. Now Holloway has actually lost to McGregor before, but he's one of McGregor's only fights to ever go to decision, apart from obviously the Nate Diaz thing, and there may be some other ones previously. But he went to decision with Holloway, so we all know McGregor wants to have his knockout finishes. It could be an incentive for him to come back down to featherweight, considering there's a new champion, and McGregor once said that he beat Aldo so quickly he would only come down if it was Frankie Edgar he wanted to fight. So this could be almost the motivation for him to come back down and almost get a better win over Max Holloway than he previously did. Holloway could change division. I doubt he will. He's probably going to defend and be quite active, an active champion as well. He's only 25. He has so much of his career ahead of him. But as I mentioned, it'll probably most likely be Frankie Edgar. What I'm also expecting is UFC to do a Hawaii show. Now, Max Holloway has been calling for UFC Hawaii for so damn long. And if BJ Penn can do what he needs to do later on this month, then him and Max Holloway headlining this card in Hawaii would be an instant sellout and absolutely huge. Those two, again, as I mentioned before, wait till the end of this video to see the clip of Max Holloway returning to Hawaii, or skip to go watch it. It's incredible to see. So what also Max Holloway did mention is the division has kind of now moved past McGregor, which is quite refreshing to see, in the sense when Aldo was champion, it was so held up on the fact that Aldo had been beaten by McGregor in 13 seconds. It's the only loss he wants to avenge. His eyes are set on McGregor, etc., etc. So now Aldo has lost. It kind of moves past it. As Holloway mentioned, McGregor was the 2016 champion, and I'm the 2017 champion, almost as they do in NBA or football, whatever. I'm talking about football, English football. There's always a champion each year in almost any sport, so it's kind of similar to that, and I think he put it very well. Let's look into Claudia Gadea versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz very quickly. What we saw in this was a relatively tentative sort of fight to start off with. They didn't really exchange too much to begin with, but then when they did, it was very good and clear to see when Gadea basically got a takedown. She is so superior on the ground game to Kowalkiewicz. She kind of gave up her back, and Gadea is a great jiu-jitsu artist. She knew exactly what to do, moved to the back mount and took her neck in a very slick way and submitted her with a rear naked choke, again justifying that performance of the night bonus. It's the only thing that's next for her is Joanna. I think a lot of people are saying Rose Namajunas, but I don't agree with that. I think Joanna is her next logical sort of fight. What they did right and wrong. Gadea, she took her down very well and submitted her incredibly well again. Kowalkiewicz, I wouldn't say she was hesitant. It's kind of how she normally fights, but maybe the takedown defense wasn't the best. Highlights of the fight, obviously the submission was absolutely phenomenal. I have to give Gadea a 5 out of 5. Performance of the night worthy, as we mentioned. Kowalkiewicz, we didn't see almost anything from her, so 1 or 2. I mean, it's harsh, but it's realistic, exciting. It was a great fight to see. No, I don't think anyone has ever finished off Karolina Kowalkiewicz, finished her in a fight before, so this was absolutely phenomenal to see. There was no really contentious moments, nothing wrong with the reffing. Again, as I mentioned, what's next for them? Gadea, Joanna, Kowalkiewicz, I'm not too sure. Maybe Jessica Andrade having just come off that title shot, it could be a good thing for her. Or maybe Rose Namajunas if she doesn't fight Joanna next. Vitor versus Nate Marquardt. Now, a lot of people said Marquardt won this. I believe he landed more strikes and also got a takedown as well. But being in Brazil and the sort of the track record Brazilian judges have when they go there, they will almost always favour their fighter if it is a close fight like that. What we did see, which was great from Vitor Belfort, where he's now fighting in a TriStar gym and had Firas Zahabi in his corner, those sort of things. He fights very much like a TriStar gym fighter in the sense it's almost not point fighting, but he's very, very methodical. He wasn't rushing in as he did with the whole thing with Gastelum or Weidman, whichever example you want to use. He waited, he'd bide his time, and then when he thought he hit Mark Cod with something good, he would then kind of rush, and we saw that old Vitor Belfort, the classic Vitor. But again, it was very, very good to see Vitor back in a good sort of light. And as he mentioned at the end of the fight, he probably will go on for another 5-fight contract, which I'm not sure how I feel about that, fighting 5 more fights, but we have to take it as it is. He is maybe one of the biggest legends in the sport currently still fighting, so we just have to respect whatever decision he makes. That's basically that for that. Going on to Borrachinha versus Bangbos. Now, again, as I mentioned, there was a lot of animosity building up to this fight, and it was kind of tense going into it, but Bangbos, he used a hell of a lot of energy in the first sort of round, and he wore himself out within the best part of maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Borrachinha saw this. He put a hell of a lot of pressure on him, and eventually he just snuck out the finish, and it was pretty brutal, to be honest. Borrachinha was landing some great shots. This gentleman, Borrachinha, is the one to look out for in the future. He is this new Brazilian, just coming up in the division, incredibly knocking people out for fun. He's a very marketable guy. He's a good looking, aesthetically pleasing sort of gentleman, so don't be surprised if we see a hell of a lot of marketing from him coming up in the future. And again, as I mentioned, it was an incredibly good win. Very, very good to see him coming up through the ranks. We also saw a crazy sort of weird, as I mentioned, sledgehammer sort of move from Bangbos. It was a quite a good fight to see, quite an entertaining one, and I feel that he probably should have got a performance of the night. Another quick mention, Kelleher had a great finish over Alcantara, which no one expected him to submit him with a guillotine. He is now moving up to the ranks as well. That wraps up this review. I went over Aldo Holloway in a bit more detail. This is the new era now of the featherweight division, which I'm happy to see. Holloway is now up there, and we can finally move on from the McGregor Aldo sort of thing. So it is very, very refreshing to see also what they'll do next. If you haven't been keeping up with the UFC, there's obviously things like Demetrius Johnson currently having feuds with the UFC and Dana White and things as well. So keep an eye on that. I'll obviously keep you updated if anything crazy happens. Demetrius Johnson maybe being one of the best champions of all time. As I mentioned in the start of the video, I'll now show you, to end the video, this clip of Max Holloway returning to Hawaii. Again, is an it's just a great piece of footage to see him returning to his hometown, and it's kind of quite. It's him and Medeiros, Yancy Medeiros, returning, another fighter who also won in very, very good fashion on the card, and it's very, very nice to see. So as always, guys, please like, share, and subscribe. I've been LordKing. Goodbye.